Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of BeanTalk. This is episode 2. Today we're going to talk about painlessly prioritizing consumer spending. So when I talk about consumer spending, there's 3 things I'm not including in this, and that is investing, charitable giving, and housing. So investing and charitable giving aren't really consumer spending. They could be classified as that, but we're just going to leave it as not. And then housing is also another maybe. It can be definitely a lifestyle choice, but then housing is also wrapped up in a lot of other things. For example, some people buy their house to eventually sell it, or they buy it as an investment. So we're just going to kind of skim over those 3 categories, and we're going to stick with more obvious consumer spending like vehicles, eating out, house stuff, that is stuff that you put in your house like furniture and home decorating stuff, clothing, travel, gifts, and food. So when most people prioritize their spending, they've got their budget, they've got a financial goal, and first they'll look at what they want to keep. They'll look at what's most important, and then they'll go down the line what's less important after that. The problem with starting out with things you care about is that everything is going to seem a little bit important. And you start to think that you care about everything, like, oh, my clothing is important, and my food is important, and everything is important. And it's harder to prioritize, I think, if you start with what's most important. So in this video, we're going to talk about starting with what's least important and then moving up from there. My husband and I'm just going to give you our example because that's easiest for me, and then you can prioritize however you want. So for my husband and we don't really care about clothing. We don't spend a lot of money on clothing. Mostly I get mine at thrift stores, and about the only thing that we'll buy new is socks, underwear, and pants for my husband, and an occasional pair of shoes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, how much do we need to spend on clothing? What is the bare minimum, and what can we kind of sneak by with? So what we've done is we've taken our clothing budget and really just pared it down to those bare essentials, the socks and underwear, basically. And so we spend just a little bit on clothing, and the extra goes into our money jar here. So let's see, what else don't we spend on? Food. Food is another thing that we don't really care about. So we've pared that down to the bare minimum. And you can read more about how I've done that in my book, Frugal Food. So we've pared that down. Vehicles are another thing that are not important to us. We don't really care what we drive. We want something reasonably reliable and safe. But other than that, we don't really care. So our extra spending on vehicles is pretty low. We do have a motorcycle and an RV, so I'm going to keep a little more in there. And then what do we got up front here? House stuff. I buy all my house stuff at garage sales, so that's really not important to us either. If we were moved into a permanent home, right now we're just in an apartment, and I think it's kind of pointless to buy nice furniture and stuff for an apartment. So we're waiting until we move into a permanent home to spend more money on that stuff. So for now, our house stuff budget can really be lowered significantly. So now that we've decided what we don't care about, we have all this extra money here in our budget to do stuff with. So if we were trying to pay off debt, obviously that money would go towards debt. We're not right now, so that's kind of a plus. Another thing a lot of people are trying to do, especially a lot of our peer group, is they're saving to buy a house. So if we were saving to buy a house, we would put our extra money into that. So once you've reached most of your financial goals, and when I say most, I'm talking about the big ones like paying off debt and buying a house mostly. I can't think of any other big financial goals that people would have except maybe paying for college or something like that. So once you've gotten all that out of the way, you can redistribute your funds. So this is how my husband and I have redistributed the money we spend on consumer items. It's not everyone's ideal, but it's our example, and so that's what I'm going to show you today. So as I talked about already, vehicles we don't care about, so we're just going to eliminate that. House stuff we don't care about. Food we don't really care about. And clothing we don't really care about. So the things that we do like to spend our consumer money on is eating out, gifts, and travel. So what we can do now that we have this extra money here is redistribute that and spend a lot of money on eating out, a lot of money on gifts, and a lot of money on travel. And there's still some left over. So that's kind of how we prioritize our consumer spending. Obviously, we haven't reached all of our financial goals yet. I imagine once we have reached all of our financial goals, we'll start putting money back into these other consumer spending areas. But for now, these are kind of our splurge items. And that's going to vary by each family. So, like a lot of my friends are big into their health stuff, and they'll spend a lot of their consumer money on food. So that's, or not, so they won't go and eat out, but they will spend a ton of money on grass-fed everything and organic stuff and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Each family needs to make their own decisions and make their own priorities. But I just wanted to talk to you today about how we prioritize and how we start with the things we don't care about and almost completely eliminate them if you can. If you're trying to pay off debt and you're trying to squeak through an area of thin financial times, you might not be happy with the way these jars are distributed. You might not be happy with spending just a little on house stuff or food or clothing or vehicles, and it might be tight for you. So if you want to learn about how you can improve those situations, be sure to watch my first BeanTalk video. It's about how to stretch your money using time and skills. So before I end this video, I want to make it clear that just because you reach a financial goal doesn't mean you should automatically go and fill these jars back up. A lot of times what happens after people pay off their debts or after they meet a big financial goal is they'll go back to their old ways of spending and they'll think, well, I can afford this, I can afford that. I can afford to spend a lot more money on food, or I can afford to spend a lot more money on clothing or other things that might not have, that they don't care about, honestly. And that is kind of a misconception, because if you have bigger financial goals, say you've bought your house, you've paid off your debt, if you want to retire early, for example, you can't really afford to go back to spending the way you were before, otherwise you're never going to reach your next goal. So for example, my husband and I have met some of our really big financial goals. We didn't really start with any debt, so that was out of the way. We made some big purchases, and then we still have some goals that we'd like to achieve, but these are more long-term goals, like maybe in the next 10 or 20 years. So this redistribution is kind of a way that we made frugality bearable and actually fun. So we're going to keep these two jars probably permanently empty until we meet those long-term financial goals, because I still just don't care. No matter how much money we earn, I just really still don't care about these things. So we're just going to keep doing it this way, to where we spend more money on the things that we do care about, and that makes our life fun and meaningful. and keeps us happy in the long run. So when you've reached that financial goal, do reward yourself. I mean, every time you've paid off debt or purchased something big, like that money can still sometimes be poured back into lifestyle. Just make sure you're putting that money in an area that makes sense to you and that you really derive pleasure from, and something that's meaningful to you. In the future, I'm going to do a couple different BeanTalk videos on things like long-term versus short-term frugality and the difference between those. At this point, my husband and I have kind of transitioned from the short-term frugality thinking to more of a long-term, like how can we make this savings rate fun and enjoyable for the long haul instead of just scrimping and pinching and really depriving ourselves in order to save money. That's not worth it for us because we still have a lot of life to live and we want to make sure we're living that, but at the same time you do want to reach those long-term financial goals. So let me know in the comments below, what are some things that you just don't care about, that you spend the minimum amount that you possibly can just because those things don't enrich your life? What are those? Let me know, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.